Michael, we are here in the old Naval College at Greenwich to discuss Erebus, your book. I wanted to begin with this idea of ships. You clearly have a fascination with sailing and with the open sea, but I know that when you were younger, it was actually trains that you were into. You used to be a train spotter. So I wondered where your first experience of ships came from and that fascination began.
It's very interesting. I think you become fascinated with things that you can't have and can't see. And I was born and brought up in Sheffield, which we were always told was about as far from the sea as anywhere in Britain, all of 45 miles or something. And yet, I don't know where it actually came from, but I was always fascinated by naval stories, I think because the Navy, with all these great battles, seemed far more sort of glamorous than just people trudging across open fields and all that. You were at sea and there were ships being sunk and all that sort of thing. I suppose that's where it must have come from, but I think it was just because I loved the sea, but because I never saw it until I was about 6 or 7 years old and we went on holiday to Norfolk. And ever since then, I love being by the sea. I feel very comfortable by the sea, and the sound of waves and all that is just tremendous. And I suppose it's a short step from that to wanting to know about ships and ships that go to sea. And yet I have no competence in that area. I mean, I've sailed a bit with disastrous results. I don't really understand it. I'd be hopeless at sort of climbing the rigging and getting the sails up. But I love being on ships, and I managed to do a lot of that on my travel series.
Because you've written several books and you've made several TV series where you've travelled the length and breadth of the globe, if that's the right phrase to use.
Yeah.
You mentioned actually in the book Erebus that when you were travelling with those programmes, you used to like to leave your hotel and to go to the seafront and to look out to the ocean wherever you were, to take that time to do that. There is something, isn't there, about looking out to sea where you feel time does melt away, because when you look out to the horizon, it could be almost any time. And do you sort of find yourself imagining what it might have been like for those older ships setting out onto those same waters?
Well, exactly. And there's also something, it's a sort of huge, it's awareness of this huge area. I mean, 71% of the globe is sea. So when you stand by the sea, you just feel terribly small. And yet, I want to investigate. I want to either dive in and swim or paddle, or better still, go on a ship and see where it'll take me. And that, of course, what fascinated me about Erebus was this little ship went to places where there were no maps. These people were going into the unknown. And I think that's what's always fascinated me since I was very, very small, of what it must be like being on your own somewhere where no one's ever been before. That was a very potent thing for me.
I think it's quite hard for people to get their head around now, isn't it? Because as you say, we have GPS, we all have phones in our pockets that can tell us a map of anywhere in the world. It must be quite hard, I think, for people to understand what it must have been like for people to get on a ship and to head out to the unknown, and possibly to know that you might never come back because it was so dangerous what they were doing.
Well, which of course several of the letters of people who were on Erebus, both in the Antarctic and the Arctic, say just that. We're not quite sure if we'll come back. And there was a great deal of sort of religious feeling at the time, feeling that God would look after you, the Almighty would see you through. When they had terrible accidents, which they did, or near crashes, it was always the Almighty saved us and all that. So that was a strong thing. But the rest of it, I can't quite get my head around what they felt. They definitely knew they were going somewhere where people hadn't gone before. And as far as I could tell, in the Antarctic, they went along with that. They were all quite excited when they got below 74, 75 degrees south, further south than Cook had been and all that sort of thing. And I think that they just do it, and you've got to have an inspirational leader who will push them on. They've got to have absolute confidence in the ship. And at that time, it was a very well-equipped, a very well-built ship, and I think they believed that they would be safe. So that's the thing. The rest of it is just like, it's mundane travelling. It's scrubbing the decks one day, even though you're scrubbing the decks at the furthest south anyone's ever been before. As a writer, I stopped one and say, hey, I said, guys, do you realise just what that was? You've broken a record. No one has ever seen that far down, that south of the earth. Oh no, we've got to scrub the decks. Have our pudding in a minute. I think that's what kept them going, just the mundanity of daily life.
There are some fascinating, I'll call them characters in the book, but obviously they're real people, but you unearth some amazing sort of characters there. I was a big fan of McCormack because of his ability to just go around shooting every single animal that he discovered, because of course he was there, finding these new species, but putting gun to them for science, of course.
Yes, I like the fact he felt obliged to shoot as many of these birds as, or animals as he could find. And the rarer the bird, the more important it was to shoot it, stuff it, and send it back home.
Mm. Were there any of those men that you have researched through the course of this book that you came to admire more than any others? I mean, obviously there are lots of admirable people and the things that they did were extraordinary, but was there anyone who you felt a particular affection for?
Yes, I mean, I'm particularly fond of Crozier, Francis Rawdon Moira Crozier, to give him his full name, who actually never made the top table, as it were. It was always something about him that he was always number 2, but he was extremely good at what he did, and he was the captain of Terror on both the voyages, and very likely he was one of the last men standing in the Arctic and all that. And I loved certain aspects of Crozier that I liked very much. One was that when he was sailing with Franklin up to the Northwest Passage, Franklin was very, very clubbable. He liked people to come round for dinner. Come on, join us. Well, I mean, and he would insist on Crozier coming to dinner. It was all right for his own officers because they were on board the same ship. Crozier had to come on a small ship across the North Atlantic, have his dinner, then go back after a few glasses of wine and find his ship again. And at one point he just says, I just cannot bear being asked to dinner anymore by Captain Franklin. So he had little things like that were very human. I think he was just a quiet man. He had this unrequited love affair for a long time, a lady called Sophie Craycroft, which is in the book. And it was clearly never going to go anywhere, but somehow he kind of stuck at it and wrote her letters and all that and kept going off to sea and then coming back. So what it was like for him when he finally went to the Northwest Passage, I don't know. He was clearly not very happy, and he suffered from depression and all that. So there's a real human character there, and I felt this is somebody who was brilliant at their job, but somehow didn't quite fit in and never quite got the glory that the leaders did.
All of these journeys, of course, were about discovery, and they never knew quite what they might discover. Yeah. I wondered whether, for you as a writer, researching and then writing this book, whether there was anything that you discovered, either about Erebus or even about yourself, that surprised you through the process.
I did discover a lot of little details, but I mean, the main thing was that I realised how small the ship was. It was 104 feet long, and there were 69 men on board. And I likened it to a Chilean boat that we'd been on one of the filming trips I did, which was about 200 feet long and had 29 people on board, and it was a real squash. So, I mean, I can't imagine really how they all survived and how they got on. And that fascinated me, and I suppose that a lot of it must have been to do with just discipline. They had work to do all the time. There's a pattern of life, but the rest of it interested me. The fact that they never, very few of them could swim, because learning to swim was kind of admitting that there might be you might get thrown into the sea, and you just didn't think about that. And the letters that they wrote, there were 1 or 2 letters that we got from, I'd say, below decks, and very, very few examples of written material from the crew. It's nearly all the officers. And there's a man called William Cunningham, and it really brought the journey to life, William Cunningham and his stories. And there were, Franklin and McCormick would be talking about the Latin names of the flowers and the animals, whereas Cunningham would just be saying, half the men got drunk again today, had to drag them back and give them a stomach pump. This was on the Falklands and all that sort of thing. Killed a live bullock and all that sort of stuff. It was very earthy. Yeah. With Cunningham, you really felt you get the smell and flavour of the ship. The rest of it, it's fascinating, but there was those little glimpses to me really made the story come to life.
Well, reading the book absolutely does make that story come to life. There's an extraordinary photograph right at the beginning of the wreck, the recently discovered wreck. Yes. It's fascinating to see those things that have come back from the ship, but to read the story, I think it's just a fantastic read. Yeah. So, Michael, thank you so much.
Oh, pleasure. Thank you.